Happy Monday and welcome to your Mental Health Mini. This week's guest is Thais Gibson and we are talking secure attachments.
There are 4 major attachment styles. The first one is the secure attachment style, and basically they grow up with a very secure upbringing. In other words, there's a lot of healthy patterns modeled to them. We have 3 other insecure attachment styles. Number 1 is the anxious attachment style. Anxious individuals tend to have feelings of loneliness in childhood, feelings of being unloved or abandoned. And it can be that they have very loving parents, but the parents are inconsistent, like they're not around all the time, they work a lot, or it could be that there's a real abandonment that takes place in childhood. And so what happens is as a young adult or going into adult years, when we start having relationships, we end up feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be abandoned at any moment. And the anxious attachment style will often present as needy or clingy in their adult life because they have a lot of these fears of people pulling away. But they tend to cope with these fears by holding on more tightly. On the flip other end of the continuum is the dismissive avoidant attachment style. And the dismissive avoidant usually grows up with childhood emotional neglect as the overarching theme. In other words, there's often a lot of, that child not having their emotions be able to be expressed and have it positively validated. And so basically this person grows up to feel like I don't want emotional closeness to somebody because I'm not accepted when I'm vulnerable. And in fact, having a lot more space from people is actually what makes me feel more safe and more comfortable. And as adults, you'll see that these individuals tend to be very afraid of too much closeness, and they can leave a relationship all of a sudden. They can sometimes be emotionally unavailable, and they can really want to pull away from somebody the moment things get too real or too serious. And then last but not least, there's a fearful avoidant. Fearful avoidants basically share in the anxious and avoidant side of the attachment continuum. And why this actually happens is because fearful avoidant children grow up in households where there's a lot of extreme associations on either side of what's happening. So sometimes they'll feel like, okay, closeness is safe and it's a good thing and there's love. And so they'll fear that closeness being taken away because they've often had the polar opposite end of that spectrum, but they'll fear abandonment as a result. And they can have that need to cling and hold on tight. But at the same time, they've often had really painful experiences around connection, so they also fear getting too close. Basically, there's going to be this overarching theme of not being able to trust, not knowing what you're going to get, and also constantly feeling like you're in this push-pull pattern of wanting closeness, but as soon as it gets real or too close, you want to pull it away. And if anybody's listening and they're like, okay, I'm insecurely attached, I'm one of those 3 insecure ones, it's not like this is like a formal diagnosis. It's basically just a subconscious set of rules that you've learned about love that you're just storing, like we talked about in that warehouse, and reprojecting back out onto the world. So basically, the first thing we want to do is those big fears. So like the anxious attachment has the big abandonment fears. They also tend to fear being disliked, rejected, not good enough, excluded. Fearful avoidants have those abandonment fears, but also fear being trapped or not being able to trust or being in the wrong relationship with somebody and feeling unworthy or like they could be betrayed. Dismissive avoidants, they fear being shamed or engulfed or criticized or being helpless or powerless. They fear being weak if they're vulnerable. So hopefully people can start to hear like, okay, those are my big relationship fears. And one of the first things that we do is we actually rewire those fears because you're not born with these fears. These fears get conditioned into your programming through repetition and emotion over time. The second thing is we need to learn to meet our own needs. And I think a lot of what happens is we have this society or this outside world that's constantly kind of pressuring us to be this mold of what societal or cultural expectations exist. And so part of, pillar number 2 of these 5 pillars is us learning who we are in regards to our needs. And every person has needs. Every person is run by those needs in a really big way. For some people, they need more reassurance or validation or acceptance. For other people, they need more freedom or autonomy. But it's us actually tuning into like what makes me feel like I'm in the most fulfilled version of my life. When which needs are met, do I feel the best? Anxious attachment styles tend to need a lot of that validation, encouragement, reassurance. Certainty is really big. They need to work with people, collaborate. They need open communication. Dismissive avoidants need that like freedom, autonomy, independence, but they actually also respond relationally really well to acknowledgement and appreciation. And they also respond really well to empathy, support, and acceptance. And fearful avoidants basically share in both sides of those. So you can sort of hear yourself in there, but they also need like depth or novelty. They need challenge and growth, and they need that connection and intimacy as well. So when we know our relational needs, we can start to understand, well, these things really define the relationship we have to ourselves. And so when we can sit down and be like, okay, well, what do I need? And how can I meet these needs in the relationship to myself first? So we reprogram core wounds, we learn our needs and how to meet them. We regulate our nervous system, which is its own beast of a topic. It's really about like being able to spend less time in fight or flight mode and really make sure we feel comfortable being in our body. And a lot of that's through like meditation or breath work or nervous system regulation habits like light exercise, yoga, things that are actually going to anchor us into our body and attune us to what it feels like to be with ourselves and be more present. And then we go into having healthy boundaries and learning to communicate properly what our needs are to others. And if we can really do those 5 things, that's where we'll move the needle on going from insecurely attached to securely attached.
If you enjoyed this week's Mental Health Mini, you can listen to the full episode. It is episode 202 featuring Thais Gibson. A link to the full episode is in the show notes. As always, make sure to leave a review, subscribe, share with a friend or family member, and follow at She Persisted podcast. Thanks for listening.